The satsang format is new to Costa Rica, and so it may be something uncomfortable for people not used to a kind of relationship where we're all sitting on the floor, we're all equal, and everyone can say whatever they want. I think the only place in the West where this form of relationship has become natural is Switzerland. Because the first guru in the West was Carl Jung, a great Swiss professor. And he held satsangs in his house in Zurich since the end of World War I. And as you all probably know from the story I've told you, he took a group of his Swiss students to India to meet Ramana Maharshi. They all went and had a great time, except Carl, who stayed on the boat because his own ego was too troubled by meeting a real guru. And so East and West did not quite come together. But Jung did invite a number of resident scholars and sages to Kuznacht and then in Bollingen, where he had his own private retreat. And throughout the years, there were regular satsangs held not only by him, but by Heinrich Zimmer, who you may have known, one of the great scholars of Indian philosophy, mythology, and iconography. And Baines, the translator of the I Ching, and many others. And in his last years, Jung himself gave a series of satsangs on the topic of Kundalini Yoga that have now been compiled into a book. And it may be one of the most important books on Kundalini Yoga anywhere, far beyond anything written in India about it, although it's inaccurate. And he admits that no Westerner has gotten beyond chakra 3, so how could we talk about any of those other things? But I like that humility. And he learned a lot in his own meditations and in the satsang format that he encouraged in order to bring together the leading scholars, the avant-garde intellectuals, spiritualized intellectuals, let's say, of Europe. And you remember during World War II, Schumann escaped from Germany and went to Switzerland, and he began holding satsangs also there, and even Sufi satsangs. And so Switzerland became a hotbed of Eastern spirituality, and it started that way ever since Muller translated the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads into German, and Schopenhauer picked that up, and the Germans and the Swiss were and remain the leading proponents of not only this form of relationship, but the integrating of East and West, which is something that has still not been completed. Today, the leading scholar is in Berlin, Wolfgang Gigerich, who has taken over the torch of the post-Jungian lineage, if you will. And he, to me, is the leading world-class mind alive and working today. My hope is that one day we can invite him here as a resident scholar to spend some time here and teach. But the problem is we're not ready for him. We wouldn't understand a word he says. And so for a while you'll have to put up with a second-rate mind like this one in order to get you ready to at least appreciate what he writes, which is celestial in its intellectual breadth and depth and capacity of downloading from the cosmic mind. So we'll get there stepwise in accordance with our own humility and willingness to grow intellectually and dharmically. The downfall of the Jungian lineage was they had no dharma, and that turned it into a mere professional practice rather than a true life practice. And so today, Jungian therapy as such is pretty much dead, and has become fluff, pop psychology, and relatively useless in deep transformation. But nonetheless, the the bringing of the understanding to some extent of the archetypal dimension of consciousness into the Western mind was a great achievement. And together with the work of Freud and the Freudians of going into the lower unconscious of the ego, gave for the first time to the West a stereoscopic understanding that we live between a demonic hell realm of unconscious fantasies and a supramental realm of inspiration and creativity and genius, that we have the choice to abide in either of these realms or any mix and match oscillation between them, and go as high into the supramental or as low into the shadow and the demonic as we wish. But that we are doing this within a historical context in which the collective unconscious of the planetary human species is moving into the dark, into a realm that it goes beyond even the demonic. I would call it the robotic, which is why I was talking about our having become a cyborg society. The dominant form of consciousness is psychopathic, which are people without feelings, without morality, without any restraints on what they do as long as they can get ahead. And the society is built for psychopaths to be successful in. And because of that structure, and the ones who are willing to stab others in the back and lie and cheat and steal and do whatever to get to the top, we have a situation where the thugs, the criminals, rule over those with integrity and who are still carriers of light. A complete reversal of any situation that has existed historically. And because the locus of our consciousness has been encouraged to be no longer in the body, we have morphed from ego consciousness to body consciousness, where the world was a meat market for some time, but now the locus is in the World Wide Web. And it's your image on Facebook that contains much more of your life energy than your body even does. This is for most people. Their life is literally there in the screen. And so that has completely shifted and morphed the value systems of the great collective consciousness out there. And the effects of that work on everyone. And I think this is something that we need to be able to take into consideration from an ahistorical position. But it's not an accident that in the world now, hardly anything anymore could be considered to be real. And it's unreal in two senses. It's unreal in the sense of being false, in the sense that you watch a news show, you know that 90% of it is disinformation, and 5% is misinformation, and the other 5% is commercials, and there's no value to what you watch on TV, but people will watch it still, and if you're not an internet addict, you're a TV addict, but both contain a kind of poisonous seductivity that cause people to spend their lives in front of one or the other or both of those screens and receive their information from those sources that have an agenda to control you and to cause you to desire things that you would not desire automatically or naturally, to the point where there is no more natural desire or sense of being. And this consciousness, which is instilled by a flood of messages from the media, that are consistently of a lower chakra nature, of an amoral, if not immoral, and violent, and hypersexualized intent, have a huge effect upon our consciousness and end up usurping what would have been our own buddhi's capacity to discern what is good for us. And the buddhi is overwhelmed by these messages that come from the big other of society. And so not only are the messages false, but things are unreal in the sense that the products you eat are mostly genetically modified or are artificial ingredients, synthetic, etc. They are not good for you, and they are produced only for capitalist profit. And our world has become an unreality of politics and of celebrity and of whatever is happening as an event is not really what it looks like it is. Starting with false flag attacks and other kinds of deceptive events which are there to create either paranoia or some other kind of political reactivity that favors what an elite wishes to achieve in terms of control, mass mind control, etc. But to get beyond that, the structure of consciousness itself, that is what we call the ego. It is a complex of thoughts, images, affects, etc., is an artificial product produced by this social system, the collective consciousness, the family system, the projections that have been received and introjected and have created an illusory entity whose intention is basically to get the approval of certain people who are its anchors and to remain in the good images of those and to be loyal to the value systems of the society, accomplish things that would make you a success in the eyes of the big other, and create a comfort zone for you, but that have nothing to do with your growth as an individual or the fulfillment of your true intended destiny of the real self, which has been long repressed and perhaps never even met and never even consciously encountered in this life. And so to enter into a process where we rip away all of these layers of pseudo-self and all of its intention to receive the desire of the other, the approval, the validation of the other, and to let go of those, leave us in a kind of psychological nakedness that's extremely uncomfortable for most people. Which is why you see very few people actually come to a place like this and feel very uncomfortable. Many people will hate this because of the information that rips away the facade of a false self and reveals the falseness and the emptiness behind it. But it is only that ripping away of what is really scar tissue of traumas and the defenses against them that can allow a true healing to take place, in which the real self can finally emerge and one can let go of one's defenses against one's fear of life. Most of those defenses being in the form of hatred and rejection of authority and rejection of going beyond one's comfort zone and living adventurously and in a state of open astonishment of continual discovery of deeper meanings and deeper realities of consciousness that cannot be discovered on the idiot boxes of the TV or the computer screen. It's this willingness to go within to discover the unknown self and receive its gifts that require the letting go of the addiction to the easy, quick fix of the images and sound bites that you get in the TV and the internet version of reality. But because the human consciousness takes the easy way out, it's much easier to sit passively in front of a screen and watch a film take you on its little journey of special effects and kill time by watching these films and being on the internet. The main intention of the ego is to kill time, rather than to realize the preciousness of time and of using time, the very limited time of life that we are given, to discover the real pearl of great price and the liberation from illusion and suffering that it will bring us, and share that with the world. Instead of that, the ego wants to kill time and kill its own desire for growth and for illumination and liberation. It's a very difficult sanskara, or tendency, to overcome. Because the ego's structure is so unreal, it's terrified of anything that is truly real, authentic, and pure. It's threatened by it. And it's threatened by not being able to control. And the truth cannot be controlled. The infinite cannot be controlled by the finite. There must be a surrender. And there is no room for narcissism in the face of God. There's no room for indulging in egoic illusions when the truth and its power faces us without any intervening masks or veils. And thus we hesitate to remove the veils. It's not that meditation is difficult, it's the easiest thing in the world. What could be more simple than just being what you are? But we make it difficult and we veil ourselves from ourselves because we cannot stand the light that is our own true being, which would wash out the illusion of the ego forever and wash out the ego's intention of superiority, its intention of gaining as much orgasmic jouissance as possible, its agenda of security, both financial security and emotional security. And so the truth and the light and the power of that real that we are is too threatening for the false self that we have come to believe we are, for us to be willing to free ourselves from our self-imprisonment that we have created and that we sustain, and that only each of us can destroy for ourselves. No one can do it for you. And the first step in achieving this is to recognize that I, as an ego, am unreal. It should be easy. You weren't born with an ego. You weren't born with a name. And the body that you're in now is very different from the body you were born in. In fact, you were conceived as a one-celled ovum. You're not that. You're not an embryo, you're not a fetus, you're not a newborn, you're not a child, none of that. The body that you think you inhabit now is not the body that you were born in. It has nothing to do with that. None of the cells, none of the protoplasm is the same. Why identify with the body? The body will soon or later become a cadaver, Is that the end of you? And do you want to wait until the final breath to start thinking about this? Or is it important to know if consciousness transcends the bodily limitations of space and time and could determine its destiny after the death of the body, if it had that power of liberation from fear, from the terror of death, and the agony, the physical pain that usually accompanies it. And so much of the ancient world was about preparing for death. Socrates defined philosophy as the practice of dying every day to the ego. So the modern world, the postmodern world of today, everything in it pretty much is unreal. But more importantly than that, quantum physics has proven that the universe itself is unreal. There's no such thing as matter. That's a myth. And even matter in its conventional understanding is now recognized as being 7% at most of the universe. Most of it is what they call dark matter or dark energy. They have no idea what that really is, but they use those terms. And matter itself is made of particles that are actually waves. And those waves are made of what? Probability. They have no substance, no essence. The feeling of solidity is an illusion. At one level, it's produced by the Higgs boson, another level by electromagnetism that produces a force field. So you don't go through the floor, but it has nothing to do with the floor actually being made of solid matter. It's 99.999% air, because atoms are mostly space. You would fall through the floor, not because the atoms don't create a barrier. It's only that there's an electromagnetic force field that repels your organismic body from the floor. And under certain conditions, that can change. And it's known that quantum effects can happen even at the macro level of classical physics. But in any case, it's not real, it's consciousness. And consciousness to the scientific mind is not real. It does not exist. Now the word exist is important. Ex means from out of, and the ist, the isness, the beingness. To exist is to be something that is projected out of real being. And so philosophers have made a distinction between being and existence. The world that exists is mere appearance that is projected by real being. But real being never appears. Being does not exist. What is real in you is non-existent. What exists is fake. A projection. The reason this is important on a personal basis is, if you believe you are a person, you will be continually hurt by the way other people treat you. Every person is extremely sensitive to the slightest slight. If you are not adored by everyone, you collapse inside, or you're furious, or you hate the world for not appreciating you. Even if you pretend that it's not true and you have the suavity to act with grace in the face of insults and mistreatment. But nonetheless, the ego is hurt if it's not fully appreciated. And so the ego defenses that get built up in order to prevent one from being constantly sensitive to those projectiles that are flailing around in the atmosphere, require aggression, and require fight or flight mechanisms, and require miring oneself in delusional fantasies of greatness or even of evil, so that one will not be able to be overcome by some external evil, whatever it is that is the mechanism and strategic choices to defend the ego, those defenses keep you from experiencing your own infinite true nature. And it's only when you have begun with the realization that I am not real, I, the ego, am not real, but a construct that I have co-created with the family system and the social system, that I can then push off from it. I can see it as an object. And I can say I'm not interested in identifying with this object any longer. It doesn't do me any good. It only creates suffering and sensitivity and weakness and causes strategies of denial and of stunted growth. When there is a recognition that I am not real, there is no I that will be hit by the arrow of a negative projection. It's in your acceptance of the unreality of your ego that you are free from the fear of insult, because there's nothing for the projections to stick to any longer. And so they pass through, and when they pass through, they go back to whoever sent it. And once in that state, then it becomes clear that whatever projections someone is having on you are their matter. They have nothing to do with you anymore, because there is nothing to be projected on. If the unreality has been truly accepted in a thoroughgoing way and not used simply as another defense, I'm unreal, you can't hurt me. No, that would obviously be a false egoic usurpation of this. But if it's real, if it goes all the way through and there's a recognition that there's only emptiness behind that persona, and that you have nothing to do with the bodily presentation of the organismic reality on the phenomenal plane, there is a freedom, a liberation from the interpersonal conflicts and antagonisms that are inherent to interegoic life, and that create destabilizing waves of energy in any situation in which there are adverse interests that clash, which is almost every situation, and thus prevent the achievement of true community, let alone of peace on earth or some larger intention. And through this emptiness of the ego that has nothing to prove and has no desire to be applauded or thought of as anything special, and is simply serving the good, that once you know the unreality of the individual, you recognize the unreality of all that is and the unity of that unreality. But the unreality at the level of existence, which brings you to the real of being. And so there is a oneness in that recognition that consciousness is a single whole. Consciousness is not really subdivided into different organisms. It seems to be. But all of the different organisms, whether of animal and plant and nature, or of incorporeal entities or extraterrestrial entities, or any sorts of conscious entities, are merely subsets of a single whole that divide fractally into apparent differential beings, but that all derive from the same source of consciousness. And when one's own focus has reached that source, there is a recognition of the unity within the diversity. And once that happens, there is no longer any tendency of projection or of introjection, but an acceptance of what is and how it appears to be. and the recognition that the appearance is part of a logic of its morphology as the world evolves toward its own climactic and climatic destiny. The importance of recognizing that the world is unreal is this: if the world is unreal, it is capable of surviving its own death. If it's real, the planet is about to die forever. It's about to become a radioactive desert, an empty planet that has been killed off by thermonuclear war, and the die-off of species, of all life forms being finished off by climate change and all of the other pollution and varieties of poisoning of the air and the soil and the water that humans have managed to achieve in their destruction of life. But if in fact it's not real in its being, in its existence, but real in its being, and its being is consciousness, then the world can be restored, can be redreamed. And for that sake alone, it is worthwhile to posit that possibility, even if one is of a skeptical scientific mindset, because it is in alignment with the teachings of quantum physics. And we sit here now at the brink of a precipice in which our planet's civilization is on the verge of death, and a death that is not only a collective human death, but a collective death of life itself in the form of the extinction of the life forms of nature. And in this last margin of time that we have remaining to us, it is useful to contemplate that all of the religions of the world have predicted that we would arrive at this impasse, this apocalyptic moment when the four horsemen of all of the various kinds of plagues would ride roughshod over our planet. The same myth is there in Islam and in Buddhism and in Hinduism. It's laid out in great elaborate form in various religions. Much of it is expressed in the West in terms of in texts that are not canonized, in the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha and various other Jewish texts, and especially Essene texts that have been censored from the Bible. Only the book of Revelation remains, but a great library of other texts in Aramaic and ancient Hebrew and in other languages of the Middle East contain these stories, these precognitions, I would say. And it's not an accident that this time period is referred to as the Messianic Age and the age of the return of Christ. All of these myths must be understood as psychological teachings about the transformation of consciousness that is required in order for us to be adequate to the challenges that this historic moment is bringing us. And that is the test of our own soul. This is our graduation exam at the end of this cycle of time. And we will either pass or fail. And as the myths say, because this is the time in which all is revealed in its true nature. This is the meaning of apocalypse. To whom will it be revealed? It must be revealed and can be revealed only to a consciousness that wishes to see, that wishes to receive this revelation fully. And the full revelation is shattering. It shatters the mind and all of its beliefs. It shatters the ego. It will shatter your sense of who you are and what your life is about. It's shattering, and it offers no guarantee that you will be able to recover from this shattering and live at a higher level of consciousness. You will only know the urgency of that attainment, and that you will no longer be able to lie to yourself that everything is okay in your egoic comfort zone, which itself can be destroyed by a simple matter of the company you work for going bankrupt and you losing your job, or a divorce, or some other personal crisis that takes away all of that smug complacency very easily. It is not rooted in the real. It's purely situational, and every situation is now morphing into its enantiodromic opposite, to use Jung's favorite term. The world is like a pendulum, and at a micro as well as macro level, everything moves into its opposite nature. And in this case, we are moving out of denial into the facing of the truth of what is. And at the surface level, it looks very bad. At the deepest level, it is the ultimate blessing. And the question will be where our vision is located, and through what lens we are seeing and recognizing reality for what it is. And can we see the real without the distortions of fear and desire? And without confusion of the real self with the ego? Meditation is the main instrument for improving our inner vision, for opening the third eye, literally, and being able to see the world as it is, beyond time and space, as well as within and pervading the time-space hologram, and understanding its inner dynamics, understanding the logic with which this phenomenal complexity functions. And that is only possible by having attained the transcendent real, so that one's consciousness is undisturbed by the fluctuations of the phenomenal field. And this requires us to live in that meditative state that is liberation and self-realization. Not just to visit it occasionally during a satsang or a special event that one attends, but to realize the self. There are many techniques of meditation that are traditional and that have been developed in order to entrain one's consciousness and slow down the mind and the breathing, and thousands of different techniques of visualization and of repetition of mantras and of various kinds of energy movements in the body. But to me, the most important thing is simply the recognition of the urgency of the transcendence of the false self and the attainment of the real. And simply by not forgetting the ultimate importance of this transcendence. And the recognition of the uncertainty of the length of time we have in which to achieve it should bring a very sober understanding of what are the appropriate priorities of our life. But that is a decision for everyone to make for themselves. In a certain sense, the world is approaching a trauma. A trauma from which the collective consciousness will not be able to recover. Once the world comes out of denial, which it will in a short time with the collapse of the financial system and the ending of the ability to delay the recognition of what we have done to our planet and what is now being reaped as a whirlwind of karmic backlash. What a trauma does is to stop your ability to think. And the defense against the trauma is therefore to stop your consciousness of your life, if you can, before that trauma happens, and keep your life frozen in the pre-trauma state. But you can't do that because the trauma did happen. But because the trauma's actual occurrence stops the mind, because it is an event that cannot be understood, it cannot be grasped symbolically, it creates a ripping of the soul. It creates a tear in which there is only dread. And that must be repressed and covered over with a fantasy, no matter how bad that fantasy is. It's better than the dread of being completely without capacity to consciously formulate a reaction, a response to this horror that has been experienced. And so a great deal of one's consciousness remains frozen in time. Pre-trauma, and then repressed underneath the trauma that is itself forgotten, or under a haze of confusing fantasies and memories that cannot be clarified as to whether they are real or made up. And then a post-traumatic period in which one's identity changes in order to not have to relate this trauma as part of the continuity of one's existence, because one must forget that one has forgotten it. The same thing has happened in the world at large, and our species having suffered from this very trauma that we are about to re-suffer from, has become amnesiac to its own past. For humans, history starts about 7,000 years ago. But archaeologists know that there were major cities 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. They are rediscovering these all the time. Some are under the ocean, some are found in archaeological digs. But Mohenjo-Daro and all of those cities are relatively recent. And they are discovering that there are oddities that exist of a non-natural variety even under the snows and ice of the Antarctic shelf. And they know that the Earth was once one single continent, not divided into its current 7 continents, one that they call Pangaea. They don't know exactly when it happened, and they will exaggerate the timelines. But many things have happened on our planet that we have no clue about. There are conspiracy theories about them, and there are all sorts of misinformation and grains of truth and various kinds of evidentiary indications of what this has been all about. But because the mainstream news media have not verified it, most people will remain in denial of any of this evidence and not be able or interested in putting the dots together. They'll wait. If the New York Times says it's real, then they'll start to buy into the fact that there were higher civilizations before ours, and there were even nuclear wars before our civilization began, and there were many other events in our history that have been lost because of collective amnesia. And once this trauma happens that we are about to face, we again, as a species, will become amnesiac to it. It will be forgotten in the next age that will follow. And therefore, this is the tiny sliver of time in which we can, in fact, know everything about our history, in cosmic terms, and about our future. And then the darkness will fall again on both sides. And we will only know the immediate present of what ensues and blossoms out of this world destruction. And so the preciousness of this capacity to know beyond what is given to the human being at any other time. And to know it not from simply the frame of reference of a creature in the world, but from the mind of God itself, is an opportunity not to be missed. An offering of grace that those who are awakened to the desire to know, which Melanie Klein said was the deepest drive within the human soul, the epistomophilic drive, she called it, the drive to know the truth. In our hyper-postmodern ego structure, that's been repressed, and people want fun and enjoyment of different kinds, but not truth. But it is that knowledge of the supreme real and all of its implications on the phenomenal plane that can alone satisfy the deepest yearnings of the human soul. And all of this is being given, but at the price of the ego. It's a small price to pay if you realize the ego is the source of all your suffering, but it's also the source of the identity that has carried you as a vehicle through this world so far. And only its death can allow your rebirth as one who knows and one who really is. And that is the ultimate purpose of meditation.